Hello and welcome to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have on my Marvel t-shirt, and there's a little hole in the movies behind me right there. That's because today we are going to be talking about Blade. Now, the reason why I thought I would start doing this series is because it's been announced that the rights reverted from New Line Studios back to Marvel Studios. New Line, as you know, produced this movie back in 1998. And it stars Wesley Snipes and Chris Christopherson, Stephen Dorff. It had a relatively good cast at the time. And Donald Logue, Udo Kier, Tracy Lords. There was a lot in there. In fact, Tracy Lords was actually in the movie, featured in the movie a lot more heavily. That's one of the reasons why she was kind of high up on the cast list. But all of her scenes ended up being cut when the final production for pacing reasons. Because she actually does appear like she was in the first thing, and then she was also like with the cop, I think, later. And there was like a couple of other scenes with her, and they ended up cutting them for pacing reasons. And it was directed by Stephen Norrington and written by David S. Goyer. Those of you that don't know, David S. Goyer has written a ton of movies. In fact, he was the writer on the Dark Knight Trilogy, Dark City, Blade. I mean, he has... he's also been a director. He was a director on Blade Trinity. We'll get to that one here in a minute. He was also a writer on Terminator Dark Fate. And so, yeah. He was also a writer on Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, Godzilla 2014, Man of Steel. So he's done quite a few comic book movies. On Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, he helped Neville Dean and Taylor write that story. So he's been on a lot of different projects, and he has worked extensively in Hollywood, and he's a very prolific writer and director. In fact, when a lot of movies need something that looks good, that's going to, really, kind of come to the fore, and it's something that he actually kind of helped write the entire trilogy of Blade. And a lot of people think that this was the first R-rated movie for Marvel, but it wasn't. This was. Yes, the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie. Okay? And what ended up happening is that because it wasn't really successful, Blade was actually the first really successful R-rated movie franchise. The second one being, of course, Deadpool. And I think a lot of people really don't know that that Blade was a very dark character in the Marvel comics. Unlike the Deadpool character, who was more of the light-hearted, kind of crazy character, this was more this was a lot darker in tone. So they got Wesley Snipes to do the role of Blade. It's kind of interesting because Blade is actually English, of English origin. He is known as a daywalker. He is a daywalking vampire. He can actually be out, whereas the vampires in this series actually cannot be out walking in daylight. Not like, say, Twilight vampires, where they just have the diamond skin that just kind of, people get hypnotized by it or whatever. These are more of the traditional vampires. They are, creatures of the night. They have their own language. They have their own glyphs. They have their own culture. And this was kind of at a time when X-Men was still a couple years off. Spider-Man was still a couple years off. There was a time when there was a lot there. In fact, the Spider-Man movies are right here, if you can kind of see them in my screen there. And so it was a while before Marvel really got going. In fact, before this, there was really The Punisher, there was a really dumb Captain America movie, and there was a Fantastic Four movie that really didn't do well. And so this was kind of, New Line was kind of, at the time, saying, hey, we want to kind of, branch out and do some different things. So they thought, what kind of a property? And they said, well, there's this lesser-known character from Marvel called Blade. Let's see if we can get the rights, and then let's make a movie on it. We'll get a high-powered star in there, somebody who we know, and we'll get him in there, and, we'll have him run out there and do this, kind of vampire stuff. And it's very interesting because it really kind of delves into the myths of the vampires. Like crosses and holy water don't work on them in this world. But silver works. In fact, Blade has like a silver katana that he uses to slice people up. And there's, there's a scene where Donald Logue's character gets his hand chopped off, and then when his hand starts to grow back, when they capture Blade, he's like, hold out your arm, Quinn. And Donald Logue's character, Quinn, is like, wait, what? It just grew back, man. Like, it's just feeling good. Like, he's like, hold out your arm. He's like, okay. So he holds it out, and then he puts it down, and then it's like he starts swinging, and then he stops, and he's like, yeah, I'm just kidding. He's like, oh, you're just messing with me, So there is that kind of humor. It's very, very dark humor. Very, very interesting. But it's an interesting movie in that when you watch it, I think what caught my eye the first time I saw it was when I went to the video rental place. It was called Sunburst Video. I went to this video rental place, and there was a preview that they used to play. When they would have new movies out, they would just kind of have a little, minute-long preview that they would show on the screen. And one of the parts of the preview was you see Steven Dorff and you see Wesley Snipes, and they're very close, and they're like, their swords are just like ching, 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 ching. And I was like, okay, I got to see this now. Like, this is really wicked looking. Like, I really got to see this now. So I went and I rented it, took it home, watched it. I think I watched it like twice because it was so good. And then I took it back, and I think I ended up buying the movie later because this is still my copy of Blade. This is the copy that I bought originally. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a great film. I thought that Wesley Snipes really did the character justice. He's a lot like John Constantine. If you saw the, either the portrayal in the TV show or you saw the Keanu Reeves movie, he's that kind of a character. Very cynical, very, like, I do things my way, don't get in my way kind of character. Very much like the Punisher, actually. Which I think is one of the reasons why I was drawn to him, because I'm a huge fan of the Punisher. I love the Punisher. I've loved him since the 90s. And I think that really, with Blade, they kind of captured that essence of the character. And I think that's one of the reasons why he did so well, is because it was kind of this darker, seedier side of Marvel before they went to the Netflix show. Because remember, with Marvel, they had Daredevil and X-Men and Spider-Man, all these really kind of like glitzy, glamorous, kind of movies. Daredevil was a little bit darker, but it was still PG-13. This one was rated R, and this was one of the things where, at the time, it was still doing fairly well at the box office, and it was still doing very well on home video. And Blade is a very, very interesting character. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because they're rebooting it. And unfortunately, because it's Disney, they're going to do it as a PG-13 movie. And I can already hear you booing at the screen. But if you've seen The Hunger Games, and you know the character of Boggs, Mockingjay, Part 1 and 2, character of Boggs, okay, and you've seen Luke Cage, the Netflix show, and you saw Cottonmouth on that show. That's the guy that they're going to use to play him. In fact, before the rights reverted back, when they were actually in talks with New Line to to bring Blade into the MCU, because they were actually talking about it beforehand, back during, I think it was Phase 2. They kind of were talking a little bit, and they were like, should we? And Wesley Snipes was like, I don't mind coming back and actually playing the character of Blade again. And I know that after Blade Trilogy, Blade Trinity, sorry, not Blade Trilogy, that's the actual whole trilogy, but Blade Trinity, which is the third film in the series, he had kind of expressed the fact that he was like, I'm not going to play this character ever again. But when they were talking about bringing him into the MCU, he was like, I actually would love to do it if we could have David S. Goyer write it and we could have, a good director, directing it. David S. Goyer was busy with other projects in DC, and he was busy with other projects, and so he wasn't free to come and write a film. And then the rights reverted back to Marvel, and then because they bought the entertainment division of Fox, 20th Century Fox, Disney did, now they have the X-Men and the Fantastic Four as well as Blade, and also all the Netflix characters, so Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and all those guys. So at the end of this, I'll kind of talk a little bit about how, that's going to shape up. Or how I think it's going to shape up. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I have a theory about it. And I'll explain that at the end. So, Blade, this one is about Stephen Dorff's character, and drawing a blank on his name for some odd reason. But let me see here. Hang on, I gotta get back there. Deacon Frost. So Deacon Frost and Blade are kind of like antagonists, or protagonist, antagonist. And Deacon Frost has been trying to kill Blade for a long time. Okay, Deacon Frost is kind of this guy who, kind of came up through the vampire ranks, and he's kind of high in one of the vampire houses. There's like all these different vampire houses, all these like elder vampires that were born vampires that, have their vampiric powers. Udo Kier plays one of these guys. His name is Dragonetti. And so, and if anybody's seen End of Days, Udo Kier. He is a very, very iconic actor who plays a lot of like villainous roles, or just one of those type of roles that he's not really a villain, but he's kind of on that side. Very, very interesting character, and so there's a whole lot of these kind of sequences where they have these things, and it's interesting because Whistler, who's played by Chris Christopherson, is kind of like the microchip. If you've seen the Punisher comic, or if you've seen the Warzone, or if you've seen the the Netflix series with John Bernthal and Evan Moss-Bacharach. Evan Moss-Bacharach plays Microchip, okay, in that series, and that's kind of what Whistler is. He's kind of the supplier. He's kind of the guy that goes out and gets stuff for Blade. Blade has the vampire thirst, okay? So he has all of their strengths, and the only weakness he has is he needs blood. But he's been developed a serum that he injects that kind of like suppresses the thirst, okay? And so the whole time he's like, injecting the serum into himself, and he's doing all these different things. And so that's a plot point that we'll kind of come back to in different ways. And so as the plot moves forward, like there's this character named Karen, who's played by N'Bushe Wright, and she has kind of the love interest of Blade, I guess you could say, where she's like, hey, you know what, I've been bitten by a vampire, I don't want to become a vampire, so I'm going to try to, cure myself. And so she goes out and, with Blade to all these different places that these vampires hang out and all this kind of stuff. And so, and there's some different things. The basic plot revolves around Deacon Frost trying to revive this vampire god named La Magra. And he needs all of the heads of the vampire houses, because the blood of the Daywalker will drip onto them through this ceremony, and it basically takes their souls, and then all of their souls end up resurrecting La Magra, and it creates this being. And originally, the ending was they had this sort of like big blood tornado, and there was, because Deacon Frost kind of describes La Magra as a hurricane, and he kind of comes out of it at Blade like, ha, you know, kind of thing, and Blade ends up, I think, taking some anticoagulant stuff and ends up, you know, kind of blowing up some vampires and stuff like that. It's a bloody, gory film. So if you're not into that, like if you're not into The Walking Dead or Resident Evil or those kind of films where there's a lot of blood splattering everywhere and all that kind of stuff, then this is not the movie for you, okay? I was actually kind of surprised that, you know, expecting kind of, you know, vampires, you know, kind of seeing Interview with the Vampire and kind of seeing some of those kind of vampire shows. I was expecting it to be bloody, but I wasn't expecting it to be that bloody. In fact, when I saw Punisher Warzone, I kind of thought, wow, did they go full Blade? Like, what the hell? But then I realized that it's more comic violence. It's more for the aspect of they're playing it up because he's a comic book character. So that's really kind of what it is. So, but when they went back and they refilmed the ending, they basically just had it as, you know, here's Deacon Frost who's being possessed by La Magra, and then here's Blade, and they just have this big fight, you know. And he thinks that the anticoagulant is Blade's serum, so he's like, hey, you know, you want your serum, ha ha ha. And anyway, one of the things that's kind of a recurring theme is that, and this isn't in Blade Trinity, but it's in Blade 1 and Blade 2, and I'll get to Blade 2 in a second. But they have this one particular part where Blade always kind of gets blood towards the end of the film. Like, he ends up just kind of like drinking someone's blood, or ends up in a pool of blood or whatever, and then he, you know, becomes superpowered because, you know, it's like he's kind of hurting and he's been kind of drained and he's kind of like, oh, you know, and but then he falls into, you know, either drinks somebody's blood or he falls into a pool of blood, and so yeah. And that really happens. Like, Karen kind of comes up to him, and because they've been kind of draining his blood, she, you know, opens it up, and then she's like, hey, you know, here, she has these little, you know, things on her neck where she's been bitten, and she kind of peels them off, and she's like, here, Blade, you know, drink my blood. And he just, you know, kind of goes in, you know, with his fangs and everything, and latches onto her, and then the next thing you know, he's like drinking all of her blood, and then he, like, you know, he becomes super powered, and he ends up, like, you know, killing a whole bunch of people, and it's a pretty awesome action sequence towards the end. And I honestly think that they did a really good job with this character, and I'm hoping that Mahershala Ali, who's going to play Blade, will do it good. And Wesley Snipes, when he heard that that's who was going to be replacing him, actually called him on the phone and said, hey, I want to congratulate you on getting the character of Blade, and if you need any help, if you want, you know, if you want to know some of my tricks and tips and stuff that I used to get into the character, give me a call. So I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool. And so I'm, you know, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, is because I thought, wow, you know, I just found out that this guy's going to play Blade, and I really liked him in Luke Cage. I really liked him in Hunger Games Mockingjay, which is actually right behind me, right in here. And I just really enjoyed his portrayal of those characters, and I think he's a good character actor, and I think he's going to do the character of Blade justice. Now, I know that they've had some animated series, I know they had a live-action series, so it'll be interesting to see where they go with the character of Blade. So after the success of the original Blade, there came the inevitable sequel, Blade 2. I actually didn't see this in the theater. I actually didn't even know that it had come out yet. And I, like, was at a friend's house, and he was like, or I was actually, no, I was at the local card shop, and this one guy was like, hey, you want to see Blade 2? I'm like, sure. So I went over to his place, I saw Blade 2, I was like, dang, man, this is cool. Like, this is a sequel. Like, this is really awesome, because it starts with, you see at the end of Blade, you see Whistler blow his own brains out. And you're thinking, okay, he's dead. Well, you find out he's not dead. Okay? And so, Blade, in the beginning, is trying to find him. Okay? He ends up finding him, and he kind of gives him a shot from what Karen gave him, that basically, what they call it is a retroviral detox. And basically what that does is it's allowing him to go cold turkey in one night. Okay, so he's a vampire, and, you know, they've been kind of moving him around, and so Blade rescues him, and then he's like, I'm going to turn you back into a human. And one way or another, these shutters are going to open in the morning, so you're either going to burn up, or you're going to be a human again. So he ends up being a human. Norman Reedus is in this movie. Also, Thomas Kretschmann. If you've seen the film Wanted, let me grab that really fast. Where are you, Wanted? There you are. You're all the way up here. Out of frame. Bam! If you've seen this film, or even if you've seen Resident Evil Apocalypse, Thomas Kretschmann kind of got his start in Blade 2. And then he went on to star in both Wanted and that other film. I say that he looks like he looks a lot like a young Liam Neeson, okay? With a very thick accent. And because the first time that I was watching Resident Evil Apocalypse, I'm like, who is this guy? And I didn't realize that it was the same guy that played Damaskinos in Blade 2. And I'm going, who is this guy? He looks a lot like Liam Neeson, but he's too young to be Liam Neeson. Like, who is this guy? But yeah, it's Thomas Kretschmann, and he does a really good job as Damaskinos in this movie. He's very, very, good. And the villain this time, the fun thing about Blade 2 is that it has a very, very interesting plot. So, the vampires want to create daywalkers like Blade, right? So, Blade, being that he has all the strengths, none of the weaknesses of the vampires, they want to create that. Okay? And while they were recombining it into different things, okay, there's this guy who mutated. And his lower lip, okay, down all the way to his throat, splits open and becomes kind of an entire, like, mouth. And then they have this little, like tongue thing that comes out and, like, latches on, okay? And so they have this, like, neurotoxin that they actually secrete when they bite, okay? And they don't actually have a jawline. They actually, this is all just muscle. There's a really cool, like, scene where that shows them, like, taking one that is basically dead because they only live for, like, a certain amount of time because they have to have vampire blood to survive. Okay, so it's like they're like vampires on steroids, basically. Okay, they also have, like, a shield encased heart, so you can't get like a normal vampire. You can stab them, right here, and it will hit them in the heart and kill them. But these particular, vampires, they have this bone plate over their chest, so if you try to stab them straight on, it doesn't penetrate. Okay, so it's like their whole thing is in, that. And this also stars Ron Perlman. in one of his first ever comic book roles. So he actually came in and did this one before he did Hellboy. And then he did the 2 Hellboy movies, and then he kind of moved on. When they did the reboot Hellboy movie, which I have right there, stars David Harbour and Mila Jovovich. It's an interesting one. I'll get to that one of these days. But yeah, Ron Perlman ended up going from Blade over to Hellboy. Okay. And so yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of in Blade 2 there's this thing called the Blood Pack, and they were literally set up to go for to hunt Blade specifically. Okay. And so this whole movie kind of revolves around these guys that are kind of going and you know, like attacking things. And so they get these UV grenades, okay, and then they have a UV grenade bomb. So basically what these UV grenades do is you kind of toss them, and then they land, and then because these new vampires are super sensitive to UV light, and it actually like kills them dead, like faster than it does a normal vampire. Okay, so they come up with these like UV grenades, and they like, you know, they turn them on, and then they throw them, and then it goes off, and it's like all these little like lenses open up, and then like the UV light kind of like spirals out of them in these big cones, and it shoots off this big flash of UV light, and it kills all of these different things. So like there's this big action sequence where they're kind of hunting they're kind of hunting down these vampires, and these vampires are coming after them, and you know, it's like there's this thing where, you know, they're doing this whole, you know, big thing, and there's kind of a double cross in there where you find out that one of the characters has been kind of a mole, and there's, you know, all these different things going on. And then kind of the biggest action kind of climax was, you know, Blade kind of running through the headquarters of Damaskinos, just like killing all these vampires like left and right. It's pretty freaking awesome. And so, yeah, the Blade 2 is really kind of the sequel that you want out of a movie. Kind of like how people consider Spider-Man 2, X-Men 2, you know, where you have this successful first movie, and then you have a follow-up that actually follows the source material, that actually brings you a villain that you like to see, that actually gives you the action that you see. Okay. And Blade 2, I would recommend, if you sit through Blade 1, sit through Blade 2, because it is awesome. Okay. Now we get to kind of the black sheep of the Blade trilogy, and really this is kind of where Blade kind of went off the rails, and that Blade trilogy, or Blade Trinity. Okay. And I don't know if you can kind of see it, but you have Jessica Biel and Ryan Reynolds. And the reason why you have them featured is because they were actually planning a movie, a spinoff with Jessica Biel and Ryan Reynolds, where they were going to go off and start hunting werewolves, and they were going to go off and kind of do their own thing. Okay. But when the movie just bombed at the box office, people were kind of like, wow, you know, what are we going to do now? Okay. Because Blade Trinity, and why I say it kind of went off the rails, is because David S. Goyer decided that he was going to try to fast track a sequel. Okay. And the original ending of it was actually, they were going to have the deleted scene that you can see on the DVD. The original ending of it was they had Jessica Biel and Ryan Reynolds tracking down and killing a werewolf. Okay? Because that was going to be their spinoff. But because Wesley Snipes was the producer on the film and the star of the film, he was kind of like, hey, it's all about me. Don't make it about them. Okay? So they ended up going back and changing it and doing all this other stuff. Now, this film deals with Dracula. Gee, I wonder. Because in Marvel Comics, they had a thing called the Tomb of Dracula, and they also had a Dracula series where Dracula was actually part of the Marvel comic universe for a while. Kind of a little-known fact about, Marvel Comics is that, yeah, they kind of took the Bram Stoker novel and, kind of did that. So that's kind of where this fits in. They're kind of like, Bram Stoker, he wrote a good yarn, but man, he's, his version of Dracula pales in comparison to the actual thing. Dracula's this big, bad, evil dude who's gonna kill everybody and all this kind of stuff. And so they basically kind of connect it back to like ancient Sumerian legends and like how he was worshipped as this god or something like that. It's a little bit like Apocalypse in X-Men Age of Apocalypse, where he's he kind of like slept for a long time because he realized that men were kind of taking over, vampires were on the decline, so he decided he was going to go sleep. And so they unearth him in Babylon, I think it is, in Iraq, and they bring him there, and he's played by newcomer actor Dominic Purcell. Now, for those of you that might think, I think I know that character's name, or rather, I know that actor's name. Dominic Purcell also starred in... where was it? It was a movie. Hang on just one second, let me find this. Oh, come on. Well, he was in Prison Break, but he was also in... there's another movie he was in, and I remember... he had a bit part in Mission Impossible 2, but no, there was another movie that I saw that I remember him, and I was like, oh, dang. That one. Where was it? Not seeing it right off. But yeah, he's been in a few different movies and TV shows and stuff like that. But he was also in Supergirl and Batgirl. He played the same character in both of those. Parker Posey's in this movie too. She was kind of a little-known actress at the time, and I think she was trying to use this as kind of her big break because it made Stephen Dorff a bigger character, made Thomas Kretschmann a bigger character. So it kind of propelled some of these lesser-known actors into better roles in Hollywood, and I think she was hoping the same thing. And at the time, because of X-Men Origin Wolverine, that's the reason why Ryan Reynolds did this movie, is because he was thinking that if they spun off into its own movie series, then he could get away from the stink of playing Wade Wilson in that movie. Even though a lot of people liked his portrayal of Wade Wilson, the way that they did Deadpool in the end was very, very bad, and so he did not want to play Deadpool again unless he could do it right, which is when we got this. Because he actually went up there and said, hey guys, we're going to do Deadpool, and everybody's like, boo, and he goes, oh no, you don't get it. He's like, this is the costume, and then he showed himself a picture in the Deadpool costume on set, and the people were like, what? And then he goes, and these are the writers who are actual writers of the Deadpool comic. And he brought them out on stage, and people were just cheering and yelling and screaming. So I was like, awesome. At least they're going to do Deadpool right. And he goes, oh, and it's going to be R-rated, because we're going to have language, we're going to have sex, we're going to have, just gratuitous stuff, fourth wall breaks, you name it, we're putting it in there. So this was kind of his attempt to get away from that role of Wade Wilson. And it didn't work. Okay? It really kind of fell flat. And, I mean, one of the things that I really just, it just chaps me every time I see this, is that Triple H, yes, Paul Levesque, the wrestler Triple H, was in this movie. And he's a 2D cardboard cutout. He has no acting chops whatsoever. If you've seen a John Cena movie, like Fast 9, The Marine, if you've seen a Dwayne Johnson movie, you know they have acting range beyond just being that person that they are in WWE. Like the first couple of times I saw The Rock in movies, I was expecting that swagger, cocky kind of guy that always walked out there with his one eyebrow up like this. Oh yeah, the people's eyebrow, I expected that. But I didn't get that, which is good, because that means he's a character actor. He can actually get into these different roles that he plays. John Cena can do the same thing, because, he's not the same character that he is in WWE. But Triple H is just Triple H. That's it. There's no emotion in his delivery. There's no nothing. He is just a flat cardboard cutout. And I don't mean to step on anybody's toes that likes Triple H as a wrestler. He's great in WWE, don't get me wrong. But that's the reason why he's only ever acted in one movie. Because he sucks as an actor. Nobody in Hollywood's going to hire somebody that has a flat delivery like that. Why do you think Kristen Stewart has so little acting time in Hollywood? She is a flat 2D cardboard character. Literally, what you see in Twilight is what you see in every other movie she's ever played in. And I'm not kidding. You watch Snow White and the Huntsman. She's flat. That's one of the reasons why they cut her out of the sequel. Because she was so flat, people were like, the critics, and even people like me who are just movie reviewers were like, dude, she's Bella Swan, just in a Snow White costume, walking around. She has no emotion, no delivery, no nothing. Okay? And Charlie's Angels, same thing. People were like, she's Bella Swan as a vampire doing Charlie's Angels things in a bikini. That's it. So, and that's what Triple H is. And you'll notice that nobody's picked up Triple H to do any other movies, okay? Because he's just not that good at playing those type of characters. I mean, hell, even Kane did a role, but they put him in a role that could suit him. Okay? They did the same thing with Stone Cold Steve Austin. They did The Condemned, and they gave Stone Cold something that he could actually get into because it was his character. It was Stone Cold Steve Austin running around an island trying to, beat up Vinnie Jones. Okay? Which he can do, because Vinnie Jones had come out there and done some things with him, and so they kind of had some time together, so they kind of knew what they were going to have when they went in to make that movie. But that's not what you get with Blade Trinity, okay? And every single character in this film is a 2D wooden character, except for maybe Jessica Biel. Because Ryan Reynolds is just Ryan Reynolds. Have you seen Deadpool? You seen X-Men Origin Wolverines? That's what he's doing. That's all he does, okay? That's why he plays Deadpool so well, is because that's his personality. But that's all he is in this movie. He's just Deadpool without the mutant stuff, okay? He's literally doing the same thing that you would do in a Deadpool movie, okay? Blade, and by this time, Wesley Snipes was like, I don't want to play this character anymore. I really don't. I'm sick of it. I don't want to do it. And I'm done after this. And I mean, they paid him a large lump sum of money. And I mean, he was high on weed the whole time. He was fighting with the actors. He was fighting with David S. Goyer. He was fighting with the executives. He was fighting with everybody. I mean, he was fighting everything on this movie because, I mean, he was like, I'm Blade! And he was like walking around on set. And if people were calling him Wesley, he was not responding to them unless they called him Blade. Like, he was, at this point, he was like, I'm the character of Blade. You call me Blade if I'm on the set. Okay? And so it shows, because they really kind of cut his part down, because they were really pushing Jessica Biel and Ryan Reynolds, okay, to be this kind of a spin-off movie. Okay? They did the same thing in Die Another Day. They had this great character of Jinx, played by Halle Berry, and the producers were like, hey, we could make a movie with her. And so they featured her so much that it took away from the fact that it was a Bond film. And also the pacing was all off. And we'll get into that when I get to my Bond retrospective. But I'm just talking about when they try to do a spin-off like this. It ends up ruining the movie because they spend so much time setting up these side characters that the main character ends up taking a back seat. Okay? And so it's like, dude, if you want to do a spin-off of something, if you want to do something that's going to be different, then do something that's going to be different. You know, you can feature the characters. Like, if you look at how Marvel did their cinematic universe, okay? What did they do with Black Widow? They stuck her in other movies. But she played an important role in those movies. But not so much that the main character took a back seat. So they featured her prominently in Iron Man 2. Okay? And you're like, damn. You know, she's kicking ass. Awesome. But she didn't take away from Tony Stark. Okay? She helped Tony Stark. She did things for Tony Stark. But she wasn't the focus of the movie. Tony Stark was the focus of the movie. Black Widow just happened to be there to further the plot. And that's what I'm saying. Is that if you're writing your side characters so much that they're taking away from the main character, then that's the problem. These guys aren't helping Blade. They're the ones running around doing all of the action, and Blade is just kind of there. And you're like, I thought this was Blade Trinity, not, you know, these two characters Trinity. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how it worked. You know, and like Hawkeye was in Thor. Very, very briefly in Thor. Okay? To set up the fact that he was going to come back in the Avengers. Okay? And he was really kind of, you know, miffed that they actually killed, you know, that they actually, you know, had his character be, you know, kind of mind controlled for half the movie. So when it came time to do the sequel, he basically walked up to Joss Whedon and said, no more mind control. Joss Whedon was like, okay, I won't do that to you. Which is why it's like he like, you know, feels Wanda right behind him. He's like, bam! He sticks her with the arrow, and he's like, been there, done that. Which I thought was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the things I think that we really, really, you know, kind of see with some of these movies is that if you're gonna do it right. And that's what I'm hoping with this new Blade movie, is that they do it right. Because they did a made-for-TV movie called Blade, the House of Cthon. And it starred Sticky Fingers, the rapper, as Blade. Okay? So you took this completely different actor, completely different personality, and you stuck him into the personality of Blade. And you had him, you kind of like pigeonholed him into this role, and you're like, hey, do this, you know, and it just didn't work. And then I think Blade the series only lasted for like a season. And I know that there's been a Blade, I know there was a Blade like cartoon. I know Blade has shown up in other media as well as just the 3 movies. But with this reboot, I am hoping that they do Blade justice. Now, let me tell you where I think they're going to go with the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it is. So, we know that originally there was the Netflix series, and there was Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, there was Iron Fist, and then they did the Defenders. And during the second season of Daredevil, which is when they were rolling out the Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist to get the Defenders out, they did the second season of Daredevil, and in there they put in Frank Castle, Punisher, played by John Bernthal, which, if you've watched The Walking Dead, you know he was Shane in The Walking Dead, and he kind of got his character killed off so that he could go be the Punisher. Because he was offered the role while he was still on the show, and he was like, well, I can't do 2 shows at once, so something's going to have to happen. So he talked to the guys, and he said, why don't you just kill me off, and that way I can go do this other show, and, you guys can keep on going. And that way I won't, you don't have to try to explain any absences, you won't have to do anything, there won't be any scheduling conflicts, nothing like that, okay? And he played that role to a T, okay? And there's a comic, and I want to say it was during Welcome Back Frank storyline, where Daredevil comes in and attacks Frank, and Frank kind of turns on this sound generator that basically just disorients Daredevil, knocks him out, okay? And then Daredevil wakes up, and he's got this revolver. He's tied to a post. He's taped to a post. He's got this revolver in his hand, and he's pointed at Frank, and Frank's sitting there, and he's and he's and they have this conversation where they're he's Frank, this is not the way to do things. You got to think, and he's like, when have you ever seen, things happen in the justice system that actually bring the real criminals to justice? And there's this conversation, they almost took that conversation verbatim and they put it into the Marvel Netflix Daredevil Season 2. And I was just sitting there just nice! Thank you! Because that's the fan service that you want out of the comics, is when they reference scenes from the comics, like they had in Civil War. They have the famous shot of Cap holding the shield out and Tony shooting his repulsors, and they actually recreated that scene in the movie of Captain America Civil War, and you're like, yeah, that's awesome. Even though they didn't actually have that in the comics, that was the cover of number 6, okay, to show the struggle between the pro-registration and the anti-registration side. And that was kind of why they put that in there, is fan service, because people were like, hey, we've seen the comic, and now we're seeing it in the movie, and it's like, hey, you're recreating one of the comic covers in the movie. Thank you! That's fan service, okay? And it's not just fan service for the sake of fan service, okay? It's fan service for people like us who have seen, read, been there, done that, and that's what we want to see. When we see these characters on the big screen, we want to see them acting that way on the big screen. So, Netflix, their viewership kind of dropped off in some of the later seasons of Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist, and they didn't do a second season of Defenders. The second season of Punisher did fairly well, but then they ended up just kind of dropping everything. Okay, when Disney announced Disney Plus, they were like, hey, we want the rights back. And so Netflix was like, okay, here you go. So while those shows are still technically part of the MCU, so those characters might be coming back because they've already talked to, and I think, and Kristen Ritter has kind of said on Twitter that she has been in talks with Marvel about bringing Jessica Jones back into like Disney Plus. They've been talking about some of the different things. So they have the Fantastic Four coming in Phase 4. They have Blade coming in Phase 4. Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. They have Monica Rambeau. If you've seen WandaVision, I won't spoil it, but they're coming out with a movie called The Marvels, which is going to focus on Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, Monica Rambeau, and Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan. And Kamala Khan is getting her own spin-off movie / Disney Plus series. I think it might be a Disney Plus series called Ms. Marvel. Okay, and so they're bringing all of these different characters in addition to having Black Panther 2, which was pushed back due to the death of Chadwick Boseman. They're trying to figure out if they want to recast and just keep the character consistent like they did with The Incredible Hulk, where Edward Norton, kind of said, hey, I don't know if I want to play this character, and then kind of the negotiations broke down, so then they said, well, who would you like to replace you? Said Mark Ruffalo, so they got Mark Ruffalo for the Avengers, and then he's been playing it ever since. So Mark Ruffalo is going to continue playing kind of Professor Hulk. Okay. They're bringing in Jennifer Walters. They're bringing in Jane Foster, Natalie Portman in Thor: Love and Thunder. They're bringing in all these new characters. They're bringing back some old characters. They're bringing in some new characters. Okay. And in 2019, they created a comic event that was absolutely huge. In fact, it revitalized a lot of Marvel sales. It was called War of the Realms. There is no Avengers movie planned for Phase 4. Okay? So, my thinking is, and I could be wrong, but my thinking is, looking at the direction that they've gone with WandaVision, with Falcon and Winter Soldier, with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, okay, and some of these different movies, Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, I think that they're actually going for War of the Realms. Because they did Civil War, which was huge, okay? They did Civil War 2, which kind of flopped, because for some unknown reason, just Captain Marvel decided, I don't like you, Tony Stark, and then they had a war. Who knows? But that was, because they had a feminist writer, and so they were like, patriarchy. But that's another video entirely. But what I'm focusing on is that they had War of the Realms, and it was huge in terms of comic sales and in terms of fan base, okay? There was some really awesome stuff that came out of War of the Realms. Jason Aaron wrote a very beautiful story that kind of like after the original Sin event where Thor lost the ability to hold the hammer, okay, Jane Foster picked it up and became Thor for a while. She was battling cancer at the same time. And right at the end of him battling, right at the end of her run of battling cancer, because every time she picked up the hammer, it undid everything that she was doing. So she was doing the chemo, and then she would pick up the hammer, and it would just undo everything. All the chemo would just purge out of her body. And so, then the cancer would remain, okay? And so it was killing her. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see that in Thor: Love and Thunder, okay? Because they've already said Jane Foster is picking up the hammer. And I can't wait to see it. Because if you've seen the on-set pictures, Thor is back to being his normal ripped self, okay? So I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes Odin's son, okay? And if they try to bring back Malekith, either in Thor: Love and Thunder or in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, okay? I would not be surprised if we see Malekith come back in some form or another. Because he's done that so many freaking times in the comics, right? So I would imagine that that's the way that they're going to go, okay? And as they unfold, you're going to be seeing all these background events that are happening where people are going to go, we don't know what's going on over here, we don't know what's going on over there, and then all of a sudden in Phase 5, I would not be surprised if you start seeing a build-up, and then you're going to see another 2-movie arc of the War of the Realms, because that event was so major that it's probably going to take 2 movies to tell it, just like Infinity War and Endgame. So that's my thinking. I could be wrong. We'll see what they do, but that's where I think they're going, because Blade, the Punisher, the Fantastic Four, Captain America, Iron Man, because they're having kind of a spin-off of Morgan Stark. They're doing and that one kid that was kind of idolizing Tony Stark in Iron Man 3, who was also in Endgame. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him maybe take over kind of the Iron Man suit until Morgan Stark is old enough to actually go out on her own. And then I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some of that stuff, because all of these characters are very She-Hulk. She started losing control of her power. She started turning into Hulk more. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jennifer Walters start to, because she's going to be just, she's just kind of green, and then all of a sudden she's just going to start hulking out, because there was a moment where she started losing control of her powers to the point where she kind of had control of her powers, where she could stay green but still stay herself, like Professor Hulk. But then she started losing control of her powers, where she would Hulk out like normal Hulk, and then she would turn back into Jennifer Walters, and she had the split personality of Hulk and Jennifer Walters. Okay, so, and that was in the actual. That was the character that was. So I think she's getting a Disney Plus show. So then that, I think, is where she's going to end up. So now I know I've been talking for about an hour. I know this was kind of a longish review because I wanted to review all 3 movies, and I kind of wanted to talk about this. And I kind of wanted to kind of set up where I think they're going with the MCU in the future. Because honestly, I am stoked if that's the direction that they're heading, because it looks, everything is pointing in that direction. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can't wait to see, because when they started bringing in some of Wanda Maximoff's powers, reality-bending powers, it was like, oh my god. House of M. Literally, WandaVision was a shortened version of House of M. If you've ever seen the House of M version of the comics, Wanda goes nuts and like frickin' turns the entire world into like this idyllic setting of everybody's personal desires. And in WandaVision, she kind of does a little bit of the same thing. And it's like, shit. Ooh, this is not looking good. But fortunately, she's able to kind of control it. And Vision now looks like he did in the comics way back. And he has all of his memories. Will be interesting to see where it's going to go, because I think she's going to end up in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, because, well, Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen are in the cast list for Multiverse of Madness. So they're going to be in that movie. It is going to be epic. Okay? And Thor Love and Thunder and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness are going to be setting up a lot. Now, I haven't seen Black Widow yet. And my girlfriend saw it. She said it was awesome. So I'm hoping it's going to be good. I'm waiting for Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings, because I think that's going to be an excellent movie too. So I'm hoping. Marvel, please don't let us down. We love you guys. We love what you've done with the first 12 years of Marvel. Keep it up. Keep it going, baby. Let's get to 20 years. And let's hit that War of the Realms. Alright. So, my name is Russ. This has been Russ's Movie Corner. And I've been talking about the Blade Trilogy and where I think they're going to go with the character of Blade and kind of with the thing. Because I just want to say really quick, one of my all-time awesome team-ups was you had the Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider, which was actually in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., You had Freya. You had Jennifer Walters as She-Hulk. You had Blade, and you had the Punisher. They all went to Svartalfheim to capture the Black Bifrost. I can't wait. Marvel, you have John Bernthal. You have Mahershala Ali. You have the actor who played Robbie Reyes. You have Rene Russo, and you have the gal playing Jennifer Walters. Don't let us down! Don't. Just give us War of the Realms, please! Okay, so I'm going to step down. I'm just going to leave it here, and I'm going to say smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think about where they're heading, about these 3 movies. Did you like them? Did you hate them? Have you never seen them? Just let me know. Okay? And just, kind of let me know down in the comments. I'll try to get to some of them when I have the chance. So, I've been Russ for Russ's Movie Corner. Have a wonderful day.